Alright guys, so by now you have seen the carnage, and you probably know what triggered it. Donald Trump, the star of The Apprentice, has punished the world. He's going against the global economy. Now we have really entered unprecedented territory where every economy is now facing big trade barriers. And it doesn't matter if you have a trade deficit or if you have a trade surplus, whether you're ally or enemy, everyone gets slapped with a tariff. Now as mentioned before, the tariffs are targeted with one key objective: to de-industrialize major economies with sectors that Trump really wants to reshore. We have to look past the reasons they give and look at the facts on the ground. And here are the tariffs. The EU at 20%, Vietnam at 46%, Japan at 24%, and Korea at 25%. China has also been hit with an additional 34% tariff. And all these are major industrial hubs that build everything from cars to semiconductors and electronics. If your economy has a major industry, Trump wants to force your factories to uproot and shift all the way to the United States. That's the simple truth, and there's no way to deny the situation now. Even Switzerland is hit with a 31% tariff. Their biggest export to the US is pharmaceuticals or medicine. Trump wants to reshore that, so slapping a big tariff on the Swiss makes total sense for him. The same goes for Taiwan. A 32% tariff isn't an accident. Trump is trying to force TSMC, the semiconductor giant, to move production to the United States. We'll raise a trade barrier so punitive that you have no choice but to set up more plants in the Arizona desert. And if you want to sell into the US market, you'll have to manufacture there. So the tariff bloodbath does make some sense. It's a coordinated move targeting sectors that Trump wants. However, there's a big problem. The US economy might very well collapse before any reshoring is done. Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary, mentioned before how the world has to pay a membership fee, and the 10% tariff is just that. We are in an official trade war, and the United States wants to dominate all critical industries at the same time.
What's going to happen is you're going to see the greatest renaissance of manufacturing in America. $4 trillion investing in America. That's going to create the most incredible set of jobs. Tradecraft is going to come back to America. People, a high school educated workforce is going to get trained. Robot mechanic, HVAC, but in high tech, fabs for semiconductors. I mean, the coolest jobs, the highest paying jobs, they're all coming to America, and Donald Trump is bringing them in because we're tired of having them built in Taiwan. We're tired of having it built in South Korea. It's time for these things to be built in America, and these jobs are coming home.
Now, the US is not going to get away scot-free though. Sure, hitting the world with a 10% flat tariff adds more pressure, but it also places tremendous strain on US consumers, their own people. The Trump White House wants to boost their revenues from the American people, because who pays for the tariffs? It's the consumer. So when you go to the supermarket or go to the car dealership, prices are going to rise by at least 10%, probably 20 or 30%. That will be in many cases. Your cost of living is officially heading up, and for most people, they simply just won't buy more stuff. They will consume less. US GDP is already collapsing. The latest growth forecast from the Atlanta Fed shows a bloodbath in the economy. In Q1, we better prepare for an economic contraction of 3.7%. That's an incredible plunge from the previous quarter, and that's in January to March, even before Trump's reciprocal tariff announcement. And now that prices are flying higher, we can expect consumption which drives 70% of the US economy to collapse in Q2. The risk of a US recession is now extremely high. But there's also another part to the equation. Foreign consumers could escalate their boycotts. Trade partners could also counter US tariffs with their own trade barriers. And that will add even more pressure on US company revenues at a critical time, when Americans are now broke than ever before and government spending is coming down. That's why Scott Bessent is telling the world not to retaliate, to roll over and accept the punishments. And according to him, the world should not take action. As long as you don't retaliate, this is the high end of the number. This isn't from a position of strength, it's a threat from a position of weakness. Bessent knows the US can't endure both higher prices and the risk of revenues collapsing. This will push people to the brink of not spending a dime. And if unemployment shoots up, if countries do retaliate, the US economy might not be able to endure the hit. A recession would destroy Trump's plan of reshoring critical industries. Now, I want to remind everyone what Scott Bessent's agenda is for the tariffs. He doesn't believe US consumers will pay higher prices. He still thinks until today countries will eat the tariffs completely to sell into the US market. But that's a very dangerous assumption to make.
Prices will go up for Americans in the short term, right?
They could. They don't have to.
And that's if they don't have to, you're arguing if businesses do not pass those on to those consumers.
Well, in the President Trump's first administration, prices didn't go up, so the businesses don't have to pass them on, or the producers in the other countries can eat the tariffs, and traditionally the dollar adjusts. So it's a very complicated calculus to see where we end up.
But here's the problem with Bessent's gamble. Countries around the world, especially the big powers like China, they have to retaliate. It's politically impossible to just sit back and take it in without responding. And even Europe has vowed to fight Trump's tariffs with their own countermeasures. If you have even managed to get the EU to hit back, you kind of know that you've crossed the line. We are beginning to see a wave of retaliation from the biggest economies in the world, and the biggest salvo will come from China. But let's discuss Europe a bit, because they have just revealed the soft underbelly of the US economy. Now, it's true that the US is not a manufacturing hub. However, their biggest export to the world are services. From Google to Facebook online products, Trump's economy sells a lot of this to the world. And just between Europe and the US, the EU is a net importer of services from America. In 2023, they had a trade deficit of nearly 110 billion euros from buying more US services than they sell. And from their point of view, the US has an overcapacity of services, and the EU has a right to tariff them. And very soon, we could see the trade war evolve from just manufactured goods all the way to digital services as well. US tech companies could be hit brutally at a time when they just can't afford it. Their stock is overpriced, and their business models are facing new Chinese innovations like DeepSeek. France, for example, is thinking of hammering down on US big tech to punish their revenues with higher digital taxes. And this won't be pretty and could cause a bigger collapse for US technology companies, which could result in massive layoffs and a spike in unemployment. Now, Trump is making the biggest economic gamble in world history. He is going against the global economy and hoping that no one will retaliate. But it's already too late. Countries like Canada have already taken action on US auto giant Tesla. They have pulled away the rebates, and that drives the cost of owning a Tesla EV that much higher. We could also see Mexico retaliate with their own set of countermeasures. Might not be a counter tariff, but they could move closer to other economies like China in a big pivot. Canada and Mexico have no choice because a key sector is going to get really deindustrialized. They are still exposed to auto tariffs of up to 25%. Certain parts could be exempt, but exports from Trump's neighbors are going to come crashing down over time. Last year alone, Mexico exported 3 million cars to the US, while Canada sold over 1 million vehicles to American customers. This amount is going to drop as consumers get priced out and either buy domestic vehicles or simply stop buying altogether. At the very least, they will still face a 12% reciprocal tariff for non-USMCA compliant goods, so we can expect a serious pushback from Mexico and Canada coming. And if you are in the markets, I gotta salute you guys. You can already see the bloodbath going on. If you heavily invested in US stocks, Trump has just destroyed your portfolio and touched your wealth. This is the problem with the world putting all their money into the S&P. The safe haven market is no longer a safe port of call. In fact, it's probably the riskiest place to be in 2025. Within minutes, the S&P erased $2 trillion in market value in less than 15 minutes after the announcement. Everything is in red, and after yesterday, it's deeper in the red. Tech stocks, value stocks, staples and banks, everything has collapsed. And as we speak, the S&P is down by over 12%, deep into correction territory. US tech stocks have collapsed by 20% as well. This is a bloodbath. People's wealth and 401ks are melting away. So if you're thinking about piling money into US stocks, realize that headwinds are probably not done just yet. Everything now hangs on how bad the US recession will get, how bad will GDP contract in Q2 this year. And that's very dependent on how the world decides to retaliate back on Trump's trade war. But two trends are beginning to shape up. Immediately after the tariff announcement, US stocks collapsed by nearly 4%, while the US dollar fell by over 1.5%. In fact, other currencies like the euro and yen even went up. This breaks apart the narrative that the US dollar is the safe haven currency no matter the underlying reason. US exceptionalism is starting to break. Countries around the world, especially investors, they are very afraid of putting their money into US markets. US consumption is going to take a beating, so forget about robust domestic demand, especially when prices are heading up. Remember that Bessent and Donald Trump, they don't care about the stock market this term. They need to engineer a crash to bring asset values down, to bring the dollar down for a big reset of the system. There's simply no room for them to do a QE and save the market, and that will send the dollar collapsing, increasing the money supply even further when store prices are still going up. It will reignite inflation again. But it's important to highlight the sector that is at greatest risk of a collapse. It's US tech stocks, especially that magnificent 7. I don't say we never warn you. Apple lost nearly $250 billion in pre-trading alone. Amazon and Nvidia are down by over $120 billion. The rest of the list are merely the tech giants who are at greatest risk of global retaliation. But what's crazy is how Walmart has also fallen. It's a sign that domestic US spending is in crisis mode. If Walmart stock is falling, this is a very ominous sign that people on the street, they are going broke. Now, how Trump believes this is great for the American people really baffles me. He's going to make America more expensive than ever before. So how bad can the market crash get? Is this a garden variety correction or is the worst yet to come? Now, firstly, a 10% drop is nothing. It has happened many times over the last 40 years. But look at the downside possible if we get into a major liquidity crisis. In 2008, the markets fell by nearly 50%. Yes, equity values crashed by almost half. And in the 2020 lockdown, stock prices fell by over 30%. Even the fall in 2022 was over 20%. The question is, how severe is Trump's trade war? Could it really trigger another market apocalypse? Global retaliation is coming, that much is certain, and China is not going to take this line down. Beijing will have to hit back, just wait and see. But the situation in the United States alone is already severe enough. Domestic demand is going to face a big hurdle. Before the reciprocal announcement, the average US tariff rate was well below 5%. Now it has climbed up to around 29%, the highest in 100 years, which means consumers across the board would pay nearly a third more when they buy stuff. And the conclusion is obvious. People will simply spend less. They will cut their budgets and hunker down. You don't need to be a genius to figure this one out. So Trump has unleashed economic hell. He has triggered global panic, and this will 100% boomerang back on the US economy. But let me know what you think. Will the world retaliate hard on the US? And how much further will the stock market collapse? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these insane times.